So let me introduce myself. I am Dr. Susan Garrett, and I am happy to be here as your moderator for tonight's program. I am the Program Director for Industry Certifications in the Workforce Institute here at St. Pete College, and I'm at the EPI campus over off of Ulmerton. It is my job within the workforce to know where we are, where technology is, and where we are heading in order for the Institute to develop the kinds of coursework and certifications that our communities, employers need for their future workforce. So how many of us have heard the predictions that about 85% of the workers in 2030 will have jobs that don't even exist today? Wow, you know. So I'm seeing, just tons and tons of new job titles and predicted job descriptions and things like that. So I'm always constantly scanning the workforce landscape to understand where the skill gaps are, where the job vacancies are across our area, across the state, and even beyond, and working to build programs that better prepare our students for the workforce for tomorrow. So our forum this evening is presented by the Institute for Strategic Policy Solutions, which is based at this campus and which serves all of SPC and also all 28 colleges of the Florida college system. So we really do appreciate them bringing us in this evening and getting all of this taken care of. You know what it takes to put on an event like this. So there are a lot of people working behind the scenes. The Institute is now beginning its 9th year of providing thoughtful, provocative programs that address head-on the most difficult and contentious topics and issues of our time, with the goals of engaging students and citizens in civic action and of fostering productive dialogue in search of solutions to those challenging and complex problems. So currently, artificial intelligence is certainly one of the hottest topics, both in the real world and on the internet. We've been chatting over at our table, and it's just everywhere. I see it all over the place, and I've talked to folks in pharmaceutical, I've talked to folks in medical, I've talked to folks even in the utilities, and artificial intelligence is just popping up everywhere. So on a daily basis, we are witnessing controversial claims about both the pros and the cons of the technologies that are ranging from everything, it will help us erase all diseases to it will erase the human race, So you've experienced AI in your own lives, and machines are taking over, and they are doing it fast. Siri turned 9 on October the 4th, and if you don't believe me, go ahead and ask her. Tesla's first autopilot program is also 9 years old. I have a great niece who's 9 years old, and this just wow. I'm just so amazed that, these things are happening so fast, and what a different world she's going to live in and work in. Alexa is 5 years old. So some of the pros of artificial intelligence may include things like it's touted that it will save time and money and optimize processes, can handle dangerous jobs and risky missions. We've certainly seen some of that in our day. It will improve day-to-day lives and improve health care. On the other side of that are some cons: loss of jobs in some sectors, lack of appropriate judgment skills, lack of creativity, and limited to quality of data. Tonight, we want to spend some time discussing both sides of the good or evil AI equation. We have the opportunity to hear from 2 subject matter experts regarding these emerging technologies. They will share their perspectives, answer questions, and I'm quite sure leave you with some new insights as well as many more questions as you leave here tonight. So it is my pleasure to introduce our featured speaker of the evening, Dr. Alex Beavers, who is Chief Innovation Officer at Mote Marine Institute. As you can see from our program, Dr. Beavers has had a long career of opening pathways for implementing the cutting-edge technologies as both an executive and an entrepreneur. Advanced electronics, automation systems, advanced materials, medical devices, and clean technologies are just a few examples of the breadth of his work. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Alex Beavers.
Can everybody hear me okay? Is this good? Okay. All right, well, thank you very much. It's my pleasure to be here, and especially with this audience, because so many of you are students and are probably engaged in coursework that will lead you into this space, artificial intelligence. And of course, you know, as you'll see as we proceed with the discussion here, we're all going to be in the middle of it or affected by it whether we want to or not, and if we haven't already. So the topic, the question, you know, the topic was, is artificial intelligence good or evil? And I think it's interesting that I didn't realize that tomorrow is Halloween, so it's a good topic. And the question of whether it's evil is a topic or a question that's been asked for a while. I just want, before I get going, I wanted to let you know I am an optimist. I think it's important that we have artificial intelligence, and I think it is good. It's going to be important to us to have more of it, in fact, from an economics point of view, because really no technology actually gets into our daily lives, gets into the economy, unless it improves productivity, unless there's some kind of return on investment. If there's no financial benefit to our economy from a technology, it's just not going to last very long. It won't get too deeply into the economy. Number two, we can control AI because we're the masters by design. We're designing AI, we're implementing it, it's up to us how we use it. So unless we just want to surrender and try to hope that we make a robot that answers all of our tough problems, which I don't think is going to happen, we'll be in charge of the AI that will be fielded in the economy. And then number three, we need more artificial intelligence because we need more productivity improvement. Our standard of living depends on it. Our global populations are aging, and there are fewer people who are in working age nowadays to help create the wealth necessary to take care of the people that are aging in our global economies. So we need more productivity improvement just to maintain our standard of living that we have today. And if we actually want it to get better, we're going to need a lot more productivity improvement. So the warnings about artificial intelligence being bad has been around for a while. Anybody seen some headlines recently about how bad it's going to be and so forth? Well, the first headline goes back a couple of hundred years to the Luddites. They were worried about, it wasn't just looms, mechanical looms they were worried about that caused the Luddite revolution or riots in England. They were worried about steam power being applied to the looms. So the looms had actually gone through 2 or 3 generations of protest in England, but it wasn't until they started applying steam power to the looms that created the biggest concern among the workers. So the headlines in the early 1800s were filled with social unrest about automation at that time. Then you proceed ahead another 100 years or so, and at the end of the 1920s, with the first industrial revolution taking place with a lot of automation in the automotive industry, for example, Henry Ford's moving production line and so forth, made a lot of people concerned that we were destroying jobs and we would never see those jobs ever again. Then another 2 or 3 decades, again, it's Britain. We're picking on Britain a little bit here in the headlines. They were worried about the robot revolution. Of course, this is after World War II, and Britain was very concerned about just jobs of any kind in general. And then as more technology was being brought into the economies in the countries that survived the war in Europe, they started worrying about automation as well. Move ahead another decade or two, Time magazine was predicting that all unskilled jobs would disappear in 10 years, and this is 1961. Move ahead another few decades, our own government, the U.S. Bureau of Labor and Statistics, came out with a really detailed, highly, 300-page report, lots of statistics about what percentages of every job type were going to be destroyed or eliminated by automation. Then there's, you mentioned Tesla or Elon Musk. In one of his more less than lucid moments, was worried about artificial intelligence, that we were summoning the demon, even though he's trying to cram as much artificial intelligence into his automobiles as possible. Anybody see the Super Bowl this year? I thought some of the ads were really funny. Michelob Ultra had a commercial where they had a robot. I don't know if I was watching it very closely because I always look for the AI angle and everything. And so this commercial showed a robot that was very unhappy because he couldn't drink beer. All right, so life's not always easy for robots. Then there was this bullet or board by Prudential that says retire as soon as possible because the robots are going to take your job. So I thought that was, you're turning, the glass is half full, it's not half empty. This is my favorite. This is a headline from a few months ago. The AI girlfriends will end the human race. They're worried about sex robots causing humans to not procreate anymore. And so someone came up with this, some kind of model that said that the population in Japan would go to zero after so many decades. So anyway, so the reality is the AI apocalypse has not arrived. There's also a reality is neither has the AI paradise. We haven't seen all the great promises that have been hypothesized happen either. This is a picture of a robot. That robot I know very well. It's called Asimo, and he was created by a Japanese company and uses, of course, Japan is investing in robotics more than I think any other country on a per capita basis because their population is aging faster than any civilization or any country's population. So as a result, they're worried very much about the productivity issue. And so they've been really doing a lot of work on Asimo, for example. This I thought was interesting. This is a little funny, this is a hotel in Japan that automated, they put robots in almost every function. You can see here's the check-in counter. They're having a little fun with it. There's a robot that looks like, an artificial woman. Then there's one that looks like a dog. Then the one on the left there looks like a Star Wars stormtrooper or something. And after about 6 months, they had to turn off almost all the robots and replace them with humans because the robots basically sucked at their jobs. And they just weren't up to the task. They weren't able to deal with the reality of the situation. So that's part of the reason that the technology just hasn't lived up to the hype that's for it, and also it hasn't lived down to the threat that a lot of us have been worried about. So let's look at a couple of things here that I think will help paint some of the, we're going to talk a little bit about why isn't this AI paradise happened yet? And so if we looked at the job situation in the US, for example, over the last, this is a 100-year chart, the number of jobs has consistently been increasing decade after decade after decade. No matter what technology we threw into the marketplace, no matter how much automation and robotics we used, there were more and more jobs being created. So that little dotted line is my simulation of what would have happened if technology was actually destroying more jobs than it was creating. Here's another chart that shows the average income per capita. And again, that's continued, and these are current year numbers, so that this is not there's no tricks here because of inflation. So the reality is that technology, all the technology that's been going into the marketplace has been creating more and more wealth. If that was not happening, then we'd have some kind of drop-off like that little red dotted line there. Now, productivity is a different story. We saw great productivity in the 1990s, the first part of the 2000s, and since about 2010, it's been not only declining, it's almost been zero. And if we'd had more and more productivity from this technology, we'd have the red dotted line curving upward. So something isn't happening with the technology. It's not creating the productivity that we would hope for, even though it seems to be doing well in terms of creating new jobs. It's creating the need for more trained people, and it's creating more wealth. But something is not happening with productivity. It's not, in other words, we could be doing even better in jobs creation as well as wealth creation if we were getting the productivity from the technology. So why aren't we seeing this productivity? I've got a couple of explanations for it. One is that the capital investment that needs to go into the deployment of technology, like autonomous vehicles and medical robots and so forth, hasn't materialized. There hasn't been enough money put into this yet. Now, part of the reason there hasn't been enough money put into the creation and deployment of artificial intelligence is that a lot of it's not ready. But there's also other reasons, is that there are other things in the economy that we want to invest in. So this is my little chart that we spend more money on pets than we do on robots in the U.S., which maybe that's the right thing to do. I don't know. There's another, I think, more important reason. It's more probably a better explanation, and that there's been a global digitization taking place around in all the different industries. Everyone, and when I say digitization, that's a fancy word for saying we're trying to. Everything's got to be computerized. We got to be on the internet. We got to be taking, using digital images. Everything's got to be digitized. So every company and every major industry worldwide has been racing to get this done. And so as a result, the investment, excuse me, has gone into things like e-commerce, the Internet of Things. We're making every device we can think of smart so it can communicate wirelessly. What we're going to do with all that data, I don't know yet, but it's there. But it's happening. Social networking, of course, is being used now. It's mainstream for advertising and for corporate communications, as well as for social networking. Everything is streamed now. I haven't watched a regularly scheduled TV program in 2 or 3 years. I'm only looking at, unless it's a football game, of course. Then we have a lot of things happening with big data analysis. We have all this data that we're collecting because of our social networks, because of our Internet of Things, monitoring what we're doing and creating data. It's digitizing our life. With all this digital data, somebody's got to do something with it and try to figure out how we can use it, either to sell a product for a company or sell a service, or if you're a government, you may want to find a way to tax what you're doing. Or if you're other kinds of governments, you may want to make sure that people are saying the right things about the government. It's all part of everyday life as to how do we deal with this, all this new data. Now, digitization is important, it's necessary, but it's not sufficient. This allows us to automate things, but quite often we automate the wrong things. We don't, I say this having spent a lot of my career helping other people and other companies automate. And I know how you can mess it up because it happens. And so if you're trying to automate a process, a business process or a manufacturing process or an entertainment process, if that process isn't optimized, then automating something that doesn't work very well is not going to improve productivity. So the ROI is not significant yet for all this, because of all this digitization happening. Now, the good news is, once everything is digitized, it's going to be a lot easier to implement automation, and it'll be a lot faster. But until it is digitized, we're not going to know what to do with it necessarily. Just like all the data I mentioned from the Internet of Things, there's just too much data. We don't know what to do with it. I don't know what, I have 3 Nest thermostats in my house that's measuring my temperature in every room I have in my house, 24/7. I don't know what to do with that. I mean, I know if it's cold, if it's not too cold enough, I turn it down. If it's too hot, if it's not hot enough, I turn it up. So that data, I don't know has any value, but maybe there is value for some other function that we may be wanting to use in the house at some point in the future. We don't know yet. So that's why data analysis is so important. We just don't know yet what all this data is useful for. Here's another issue, and this is my this chart here is because of some of my lost youth I mentioned spent helping other companies improve their productivity. You really need to look at the workflow. You need to eliminate variation in your work process. A variation is a source of errors, and if you do it right every time, that means you're going to have a perfect product. So quality has improved dramatically. We very seldom today buy products that we have to return because they don't work, whereas you go back 20 or 30 years, we all remember the car that was a lemon, or the Monday car. I mean, there's all sorts of experiences we had with bad products. We need to have more flexibility in some of our processes, depending on what it is. We often need to decentralize things. The other phenomena here, and this is true, it's been proven by research papers and among the psychologists, human behaviorists, and so forth. I've seen it every year in my work life, that when you bring in big tech, you make a big change with technology, you usually cause productivity to actually reverse. You take 3 steps backwards to take 1 step forward. And this happens over and over and over. And a lot of it just has to do with people having to learn to do something different. I mean, how many of us are happy every time we have to update our iPhone software? I mean, that's an example. They change something, changes all of our settings, so we end up having to relearn our phone again. So it's that human interface, machine-human interface, that is so important. So whenever we bring in new tech, if we haven't prepared for those changes, it's going to cause problems, and until we get up the learning curve. Once we're up the learning curve, then we do see that productivity show up, but quite often we take a step backwards. Here's an example. I'm one of McDonald's biggest customers. I love the sausage egg McMuffin. Their idea about kiosk in the store was not a good idea. I don't know how many of you have seen those or not. You walk in. I remember the first time I saw them, I walked in, I looked at this thing, and I said, what is this here? And I just go right up to the counter, and I say, give me a number 2, and that's it. And then the next time I was in the store, they actually had an employee standing next to the kiosk to help people learn how to use the kiosk. So now they moved them out of the way so you can get to the counter just fine. Now, one thing McDonald's has done, they've constantly looked at how to use technology to help them and improve their business. And one of the things they're doing now is you can get an app, a McDonald's app, and so you can order your meal before you get there, and as you drive up, they bring it out to you, which saves 22 seconds, because normally you can drive through and get your order. But that's the world that they know that they're serving, the customer base that they're serving. We get used to ordering, using apps to order our food and other things. And they're doing other things to try to understand how to better serve their customer base. So it's a matter of implementing something and trying it to see what happens. Now, as I mentioned, we had great productivity. This chart shows some curves about productivity improvement in the U.S. over a period of decades. And in the 1980s, we had a lot of productivity due to the use and introduction of personal computers in some businesses. In the 1990s, we had a huge amount of productivity that resulted from enterprise systems, more and more companies putting in corporate computers to take care of overhead functions and things like that. But eventually, the productivity growth flattened out. There is a point of diminishing returns with the technology that was put in place. We can improve productivity, but once everybody's been made productive with that technology, productivity improvement doesn't happen. We're sort of stuck. So we need new innovation to bump us up to the next level of productivity. So I think this is where we are right now. Is we've been in a point of diminishing returns here with the productivity that we saw in the 2000s, and we're waiting for that next round of innovations to really happen. And maybe it's autonomous vehicles, maybe it's other kinds of things we'll talk about in a minute that will give us a big boost in productivity. So now let's talk a little bit about the challenges facing AI. I mentioned that in many cases AI is not ready for prime time yet. And there's several reasons for that. Number one, it's the curse of dimensionality. This is a term that's been around for decades, but the more we digitize something and the more we try to compute it and apply computers to solving a problem, the more computational steps it takes. It's like all the chess software, all the AI chess software, that if you were to use a computer and say, I'm going to simulate every possible move, I'm going to exhaustively calculate all the possible moves given a certain situation on a chessboard, and I want to come up with the most likely next move to win based on looking at the complete scenario or simulation of all possible scenarios, all the computers in the world would take 1,000 years to do all those computations. It's because there's just too many steps to calculate in a game of chess. Now, in the game of Go, which, I'm mentioning these games because this is where the big corporations like Google and Facebook and so forth are touting the success, and IBM are touting the success of their AI programs. They've got a chess program that can beat the Grandmaster. They've got a Go program that runs faster than anybody else. What they are doing is they're not exhaustively calculating every possible scenario. What they're doing is using statistics to calculate the most likely winning scenario. And they're doing that with machine learning. So they're basically experimenting with, and it's almost you can take random steps. That's why the recent articles that you may have read about the Google Go algorithm was so unusual because they said it didn't act like a human. It wasn't making decisions like a human would. Because a human would think, logically, or they think about patterns. Well, the Go algorithm was just randomly doing Monte Carlo simulations and coming up with the probabilities of what the best next step would be. So they were calculating the best step to take, the best bet to make. So you can calculate that pretty fast because we're not talking about calculating an infinite number of steps. So that's an example of where AI and machine learning is being used to try to simplify a problem and make it calculable with the technology we have. Another problem is data quality. Garbage in, garbage out. That's been as true as ever. We can have the smartest algorithms in the world. If the data we're bringing in has lots of noise or lots of errors in it, you can't make it any better. It is what it is. So now, maybe the AI algorithm can squeeze out whatever value or knowledge is there faster than a human can, but we can't, if the data that's coming in is not high quality, we're not going to have high quality decisions. Another challenge is uncertainty. As I mentioned, the Go algorithm was using statistics or Monte Carlo simulations to try to generate statistics so that they can make the best bet on the next step faster than a human could. Now, what that means is that the uncertainty of making a bad decision is still there. With Monte Carlo simulations are simulating randomness in the decision-making process. So we call it learning. The machine's not getting smarter than we are. It's just calculating the statistics and the probabilities faster. So, and that's useful. That has value. But it doesn't mean it's getting smarter than we are. It's just a tool that we need to learn how to use. But the fact that there's always uncertainty in the universe doesn't mean that we're going to suddenly have better knowledge or more precise knowledge. It just means that we'll have whatever knowledge we can have faster. Now, in some cases, it's all of the above. The 737 MAX had years and years and years of development, and it looks like one bad decision after another was made in the software and the user interface with the pilots and the equipment that was on the plane to measure the angle of attack. Everything you can possibly imagine that went wrong, that could go wrong, did go wrong in the design process. And the reality was that maybe the plane would be successful 89% of the time, but that's not good enough. We want it to be successful 100% of the time. So that's an example of where we need to do a better job of improving the quality of the data, understanding what uncertainty is that we're dealing with, worrying about the human-machine interface. So if we're still expecting pilots to fly the plane, we've got to provide them with the information that they need and in a way that they can use it, and so forth and so on. So sometimes our technology gets us to the point that we suddenly have a big mess. We have so much data, we don't know what to do with it, or we may end up making the wrong decisions. Now, let's talk about some of the big opportunities for AI, because there's a lot. Right now, there are a lot of the medical schools around the country are using AI and virtual reality tools to help train the new doctors. And they're teaching the doctors how to collaborate with technology. And that's what we're going to that's what I think we're finding in a lot of our jobs. The jobs are changing because of technology, but they're changing to allow us to collaborate with technology. Even in McDonald's stores, you go in, you probably won't even see a written word on any of the machines there. They're all icons. And the icons have behind them algorithms that are designed to perform certain functions. So we're learning how to collaborate with the technology so that the humans that interact with it can be better and be more productive. Autonomous machines. We already have the world's best autonomous machine and the biggest transformation of the entire industry, ATMs. I mean, how many people have actually walked inside of a bank recently and went up to a teller and talked to them? It's not happening very often nowadays. I even use my online app to deposit checks, which I never thought. I mean, I'm super cautious about cybersecurity and all that, but once I learned that I can just take a picture of my check and deposit it in my bank account, I thought, wow, this is really cool. This is good. So we're going to see more of that, and those are more and more opportunities. Hopefully, this will happen where we get precision medicine. Our technology will allow us to understand where the unique features of our biomicroorganisms are. What is our physiology like? What's our DNA like? what medicines work with us, which medicines don't work with us, what are alternative ways to treat different maladies. Today there's a huge amount of data that's just locked away in places that we can't get to, either because they're physically separated or because of privacy issues that are legally blocked or just blocked in depending on what the nature of the industry is. We think that in the future we're going to see bigger opportunities to use precision medicine that will be able to diagnose people and treat them as individuals. AI is also creating a lot of new types of jobs, which some of you may be interested in here. So here's a list of jobs that I just ripped off quickly when I was preparing this chart. Data scientist. Who knew what a data scientist was 5 years ago? Machine learning specialist, user experience designer. So we used to call that, man-machine interface, how many icons can you put on a screen at a time and so forth. Well, we're talking about now virtual reality interacting with people. This is completely different. We're talking about a machine acting like a human, talking to a human. How do we deal with that? Full stack engineer. How many know what a full stack engineer is? All right, great. That was a new term for me a couple of years ago. So there's a lot of new jobs being created with new titles. Oh, you don't need to know. Now, so when you look at if you're going to put something in the cloud and you want to use the internet and you have your personal computers, there's a stack of software, algorithms or protocols that are required to work together successfully. And so that if you're building an application in the cloud, you got to know how to do that. So that's anybody that knows a better definition, you can come up after the presentation. So AI is changing jobs to overcome the dimensionality. So the more we digitize, the more dimensions, the more steps, the more computation we have to do. So the problem gets harder, not easier. We want to reduce the time to analyze the data. We want to improve the quality. We want to reduce the uncertainty for our decisions. There's always going to be uncertainty. I want to minimize it as much as possible. And then we also want to optimize the use of assets. So jobs are changing, and people will have to change with that. So there's a nice little buzzword I like, upskilling. That's the CEOs talk about upskilling nowadays. It's how do we get employees trained with new skills and new skill sets. And that requires not only that they learn new technology and terminology, but they also learn how to collaborate with the machine. That's important. So because of that, and the need to upskill, and also because AI is providing us with some new tools, we're learning new ways to learn. So AI, artificial intelligence technology, is driving education technology. I'm sure everybody's probably seen a MOOC lecture online or listened to lectures on YouTube or had an online course. That's been around for quite a while. We're seeing now more autonomous teaching. The state of Florida has a pretty good online education system for K-12. And we're seeing more and more universities have online courses to augment their curriculum. And we're going to see more and more virtual reality, augmented reality, mixed reality in these courses. Our generations are going to be expecting new educational technology. I've got a grandson that's 2 years old that already knows how to use not only my iPhone, but my TV controller, which is even more important. He's not communicating via social networks yet, but he will be pretty soon, and most everybody else does. And most of us are now spending hours on end in front of a screen, for purpose, on purpose or not. It's happening. So we're more and more of our younger generations, and even the generations the age are getting used to expecting to see new technology. So this demand for new educational technology is going to be probably the strongest among the newer generation, the kids that are coming up through the K-12 now. They're going to be expecting to see really super cool technology in their educational programs. All of you that are getting your degrees now, you're sort of stuck with what you got. The older mid-career generation are actually experiencing and demanding new educational technology. The people that need upskilling, that need new courses, they need to learn how to deal with a new tool, or they need to learn how to do something that their job requires that they couldn't do before. There are more and more options now from just about every spectrum of the education industry to give them online training. That's sometimes it's very autonomous. Quite often it's interactive with humans. But every major university is doing this. There's some new ideas that are popping up about education. Instead of seat time as being the unit of measure of whether how much time, what does it take to get a piece of paper that says that you've learned something, how about learning units, where we can certify, or we have a certificate that says we've learned something. We've learned how to write a program in this language. We've learned how to do this kind of a data analysis. We've learned how to operate this kind of machine. Self-paced tools to make sure we learn at the speed that we have to spend on learning. And then competency confirmed by testing. We can demonstrate that we've learned it because we can pass a test, or we can do a drill or something that proves that we've learned how to do it. This is a term which I think your college here is rapidly moving into, is creating certificates, offering what one term is used for this is stacked certificates, where instead of giving a full degree, you get a certificate and one body of knowledge or one unit of knowledge. And then those certificates add together, and in some cases it ends up being turned into a degree. So MIT is offering a micro MBA program where you can take a certain number of courses over 3 or 4 months online. You get a micro MBA certificate. And when you get 3 of those, you get a full MBA. Okay? So, all right. The MIT and Harvard and a few other universities have formed an online educational company called EDX, which offers courses online from all those different universities. VIP Kid is the best funded online education startup in China. It's got about $4 billion already invested in it. And the purpose of this startup is to teach children how to speak English and other languages. Coursera is an online education company that was founded by 3 professors from Stanford about 5 or 6 years ago, and they're now offering certificates in a wide range of areas. And they aren't just technical areas. You can get a degree in Python programming, but you can also get a certificate. You can also get a certificate in American history between 1880 and 1920, if that's what you're interested in learning. So you can prove that, I studied that, I learned it, now I can move on to something else. So, another idea here for the education industry is let the market innovate education. Let the technology find a way to do a better job improving productivity in our educational system. And I think St. Petersburg College, as you probably know, is becoming a leader in how to create certificate-based learning units. So, just as a parting thought, as I said, it's important that we have AI to improve productivity. If there's no return on investment, we're not going to see AI in the marketplace. We can make it collaborate. So we'll control it by design. And then the most important thing is it's necessary. We need it to create new wealth so our standard of living does better than we're doing now and actually improves. So finally, I thought this was reflective. I asked our smart speaker if it was eavesdropping on us, and it called me a lazy bum who can't even load a dishwasher correctly. And the lady sitting next to him says, well, it sounds like it's using machine learning too. So personal experience. Anybody had a personal experience where you thought Siri was listening to you? Or I've actually had that. Okay, I'm done. Thank you.
My goodness gracious, what a great way to start this program off. Thank you so much. Now I would like to introduce to you the next speaker, and I am most happy to introduce Mr. Chad Marin, who is not only a librarian and a professor here at SPC, but he is also the creator of the Innovation Lab, which is here in this building on the second floor of the library. On any given day, you might walk down the hall and walk by the lab and see him bouncing around ideas with an intern or someone from the manufacturing sector, or perhaps in the midst of a huddle of fourth graders, watching 3D printing in the works, or possibly he'll be fine-tuning his personally created version of Alexa. So, Chad, welcome to the stage.
All right, well, thank you very much. How are you all doing tonight? Doing good? Okay, so what I'm talking about tonight is just a little bit quickly understanding artificial intelligence. So the other night, I went home, I sat down in front of my computer, I turned it on, got in front of it, and I asked AI to write my presentation. It didn't do it. I'm sitting there waiting, and it never happened. So I think the first thing you need to know is, before we understand what artificial intelligence is to understand what intelligence is. The ability to acquire and apply knowledge and skills. And so then artificial intelligence is basically intelligence in machines, right? So they're never, I don't think, ever going to be as creative as a human. We're using them more as kind of helpers, that kind of thing. So this is a beautiful chart, I think. Because data is pretty much useless, like you were mentioning. It's just a bunch of dots, right? Information, we start to see relationships, making pattern recognition, that kind of thing. Knowledge comes when we start to memorize some certain concepts, that kind of thing. And then the insight is we start to synthesize this knowledge. And then wisdom, there's like a return on investment now. You know? So I found this pretty interesting too. If we want our machines to possess anything approximating human intelligence, maybe we should think about giving them a childhood too. Think about that for a second, right? Kids are brilliant. My kids, when they were younger, I mean, they might forget to put their pants on, right? But you give them a weird little puzzle, like an abstract puzzle, they get it. So I think our AI needs to kind of develop this kind of thinking and learning down the road as well. We've seen this before. I'm not a robot. Now, have you seen the ones where there's an image where you have to this is a crosswalk, this is this? You know what I think that's what we're doing? I think we're helping Google's machine learning. I think we're training it. Think about it, right? You look at these images and you're going, okay, that's a street light, that's a stop sign, that's this. We're telling it what it is. The Google scanning, when they did all the scanning of the books, they were reading all the books. I don't know if the video is going to work or not. Yeah, it might. Is the video going to play? Can you play it?
Is that good? That one?
That's it.
Barracuda, how may I help you?
Hello?
Hello? Hi, how are you?
I'm Google's automated booking service calling for a client, so the call may be recorded. Unfortunately, they needed to cancel their reservation.
Okay.
So, do you need the name?
Please.
The first name is Chad.
Chad. C-H-E-D.
No, first name is Chad. C-H-A-D.
Okay. Thank you for call.
Okay, great, thanks.
You're welcome. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Some people doubt that it's true. Some people think it's fake. Like there's a whole ghost worker thing going on. People behind the scenes are kind of coaching the AI to do its thing. Maybe. But you can train AI to sound. You give it all your voice, the timbre of your voice and all that, and it will develop your voice. Anyway, we can't play that? Okay. But it's interesting though, and she said, oh, Chad Marin, right? And he said, yeah, and she spelled it incorrectly in her Spanish accent. And he said, no, that's not correct, and he corrected her. So that AI understood her language as well. So which one of these photos is real, do you think? The left one? Anybody else? Both of those images were computer generated. Those people do not exist. Pretty amazing. I'm always like, those things are interesting to me. A computer generated that. They got a bunch of images of human faces, right? And then the generative adversarial network, I think it's called, it then competes and it creates all the statistical stuff, and then it creates these faces that don't exist. I'm like, one of these days, if my face shows up there, I'm gonna be like, okay, that's odd. Who knows? So coming from the student perspective, I went out and had an AI write this article for me. It's called SciGen is the bot that creates this, right? It's called Deconstructing Symmetric Encryption. It did all of that. What's interesting is some papers have been accepted. This is an AI writing it. I didn't do it. I just put it in. I added a few things, and it wrote it for me. Right? So coming from higher ed, you wonder how many students are actually having an AI write for them. I mean, there's AI out there that detects plagiarism just as fast as it can write a paper. We can detect usually if it's plagiarized. This is interesting. So this was a previously unseen Picasso painting that was painted actually by a neural network. So the old guitarist is one of his famous paintings. Scholars could see underneath for a while, like there was something there. So they used like X-ray and infrared lights, and then they fed that into a neural network, and it painted that. It might not necessarily be exactly the thing he painted, but it's a good idea of what it looked like. So that's pretty powerful of what an AI can actually do. Flow machines. This is a way for musicians to work with an AI to kind of help them develop melody or different kind of harmonies, that kind of thing. But the final decision comes down to a human. So the AI is like, hey, look at all these ideas, look at all these weird sounds, look at all this stuff. But the composer says, okay, you know what, I'm gonna grab this and take this. So there's a whole album called Hello World Album. Or it's just, no, I take it back. It's called Hello World, and it's actually really good. So if you have a minute, definitely check that out. This is a really old slide, but I like to put it in here because the Pentagon seeks 12 to 15 billion for AI weapons research. So I know like the consumer side of it, I mean, AI is cooked into our phones. It is in a lot of places. It's not everywhere, but the military has it, right? They do. This is something, so Tensorflow is a open source machine learning kind of network. And that is detecting, so you could picture a drone flying over, and with Tensorflow technology, it can actually detect what that object is. So I'm actually working on a vision system. Let's see and it's actually this little Raspberry Pi. See how small this thing is? And this little vision bonnet is what powers the camera. The camera I can't find. The Raspberry Pi is fried, it crashed, but I had it working, and I had it set to where I could have the camera up here being powered by the Raspberry Pi, and it would go through and it would look at objects on my desk, and it would tell me what they were. It does a confidence score. So it's like, you know what? I'm 90% sure, the AI says, or the machine learning says, I am 90% sure that is a computer monitor. That's a pen. That's what this kind of, look how small it is. It gets smaller than this. If you ever want to try this stuff, and I do have some things that some other stuff that I built, if you want to try to see how it works, because it's really interesting to see how things behind the scenes are working. Oh, this is interesting too. Elon Musk, Roko's Basilisk is kind of a thought experiment that basically says, okay, you know what, maybe we should do AI now, because when it becomes this super intelligent thing down the road, it's going to come back and get us. So we might as well be cool with it now. And then here's this, what's in there? This is the AI box experiment. Maybe we should just keep the AI in the box to communicate with it. This is the fear that a lot of people have, that you let it out into the world, it's going to take over. Highly unlikely. Right? But who knows? Maybe famous last words from me, who knows? So since I work in the library, and I do manage the innovation lab as well, which for me, my main role is to show people what's possible with technology and then let them come in and play with it. So we've got tons of stuff. I mean, the AI is just part of it, virtual reality, all this other thing. But I'm very interested in the way libraries work. So this article kind of goes into why would we want to read a book when an AI has read all of them and can probably make a decision like that? Why do we want to do that? Why would I go up to a reference librarian and ask a question when I can probably get an answer almost instantly asking Google or Siri? Might not be a good answer, right? I do like this part of it, though. Libraries can help secure privacy by providing anonymous ways of interacting with AI systems, sort of like we do with books now. Also, if there is a job shortage, a lot of people will come to libraries, and they're going to come to higher ed institutions to kind of learn these skills, to adapt to whatever it is they need to adapt to. I also like the idea of why do we build these machines? What's the main goal of building an intelligent machine? For me, it's to hope make my life a little easier, to do the mundane things I don't want to do, where I can spend more time thinking about things. I can spend more time with my family. I can spend more time trying to come up with a new idea, that kind of thing, being creative, than doing the typical day-to-day things. That's what I think the main goal when creating this intelligent machine is. So I'm always interested in this. So if you're interested in doing AI or machine learning, Python is a program you're going to want to learn. R, Lisp, Prolog, and Java. C++ if you're into robotics, right? Python, though. The TensorFlow library, all that stuff goes on into Python. The little box I built over there is in Python. The tic-tac-toe game, you guys can try to beat the computer if you want. That's all written in Python. So if you want to start dabbling in this stuff, there's tons of free online resources to learn it. And as Alex meant earlier, AI is not as smart as we think or fear, because it's only as good as the data we put in it. Right? So if you're putting lousy stuff in, lousy stuff's going to come out. This is, so everything, for me at least, is based on trust. Do we trust this AI thing? Is it good or evil? I don't think it's either. It really depends on the person creating it, right? So deep fakes, this deep learning in fakes, I'm sure you've seen these videos, right, where it looks like someone's talking, but it's not them. Have you seen these? It's gonna get worse. They're gonna become so believable. So AI, neural networks are building this kind of thing, and we have AI on the other side trying to find out what's being created, trying to combat it. And then we've got bias. I don't even know, I mean, maybe we'll touch on it in the Q&A. Bias is a big deal, right? I mean, a lot of facial recognition won't see a dark-skinned person, for example. Why is that? There's bias, there's prejudice in the programming. Explainability, right? How do we know what's in that box? It's got to be open. So some things to look into. This is they call them I don't know if it's PAI or PAI, but a personal artificial intelligence. So you've got your own little avatar. It records your voice. You speak into it a bunch of times. It starts to develop your timbre of your voice. It's really freaky. I'm doing a lot of research right now with holograms too, and where I can meet with a bunch of people from all over the place that are in San Francisco. I'm here, and they're in the room with me as holograms. And I was just telling them at the table earlier where I almost feel like I'm bumping into them at times. They're not there, but it feels like they are. AR, too, is another thing. I mean, the AR stuff doesn't see you. There's spatial computing now that has AI built into it where these objects know this is a table. They know you're there. It's coming. It's here. And then OpenAI is something you're going to want to look into also. And futureoflife.org, another really great resource to kind of keep up with all this. My slides are all up there. How am I doing on time? I didn't get any numbers. That's it, okay. So keep in touch. If you ever want to do a tour of the lab, let me know. I did bring a box that I'm building myself. It was loud earlier, it didn't work, but if you want to try it later, we can, or if you want to try to beat the AI in tic-tac-toe, I'm actually getting better than it now. For a while, it beat me all the time. So keep in touch. All right, that's all I have. And I guess we'll move on. Thank you.
Cool. These microphones, this is great. Wow, you guys, thank you so much. There's so many questions that I could ask you, but we've had some questions that came in as you were registering. So I'm going to take a few minutes to ask a couple of those, and then we're going to open it up to the audience as well. So I'm going to ask you a couple questions, and I'm going to ask you to keep your answers fairly short so that we have time for more questions. So the first question, and this is one I hear all the time, is how can artificial intelligence create jobs instead of eliminating them?
Hello. Okay, good. You're turning it on back there. Okay, great. I kept looking for the button. See, I'm not trained to use this AI. Yeah, I know. So I think, and I mentioned a couple of my charts, it's creating new jobs because it's, in order for AI, any application of AI to enter the marketplace, it has to be sold, it has to be maintained, it has to be, people have to be trained to use it. There's a whole ecosystem around every product that comes to market. There's a whole ecosystem that comes around each new application. So that all is job creation. Sometimes the application may eliminate a job. Sometimes it's an application that helps make the person in that job smarter or work more productively. So there's the new technologies that enter the marketplace create their own economic ecosystems. And most of the time, the technologies will enhance or amplify an existing job, and then eventually that job will morph into something else that's totally different. So it just disappears.
Yeah, and I think being able to adapt to whatever's coming, like I'm always saying, I'm not training anybody for a specific career. I'm trying to just be like, hey, look, this stuff exists out there. You might want to start paying attention. especially when it comes to AI. So, you know, learning how it's built and learning what keeps it running is probably a good start, so you can adapt to whatever. And then if you look at robotics, you know, there's repair technicians needed for that. What happens if the robot collapses or it runs out of batteries or whatever, right? They're going to need those types of technicians. It's not going to kill all the jobs. There's a lot of caring, kind of creative thinking that needs to be done. They're not really good critical thinkers. They can help us find patterns in things, but they're not really good decision makers. That's where humans come in.
Thank you. Here's another good one that I was really intrigued with the question. And the question came in from one of our participants. Is there a good source to learn about how artificial intelligence will relate to public policy and the law? And this comes from a current law student interested in the development of the legal field as it relates to machine learning and kind of where they would start to look at that as a career.
So AI is creating all sorts of new opportunities for lawyers. Lots of new liability issues, insurance issues. When an autonomous vehicle has an accident, who do you sue? Is it the programmer? Is it the person, that sold you the car? All sorts of those issues. The European Economic Union has done a great job of looking at how to generate new laws to govern and control the application of automation, not only from a taxation point of view, but also from an ownership, IP ownership point of view. So the use of automation and artificial intelligence is creating all sorts of new opportunities for the legal system. And I mean, you know, another example of, I think, a technology that's run amok is electric scooters. They're everywhere, and every municipality has to change its laws about where the scooter can go and where it can't go. And it's it's chaos out there in many cities. And the sooner those things go away, the better, the happier I'll be. But anyway, that's just another example of how technology is creating new. And it's not making our legal system simpler or smaller. It's getting bigger.
Well, you know, I don't know that much about it, but I would think that with machine learning that it could read through books and books and books of legal documents and be able to make some kind of like, oh, I've just read all of this stuff, and then here it is. And now the human, it's my assistant, right, this machine learning. Now I have all this stuff I can look at and go, I can make a better decision now if I want to take this to court or not. I'm just not an attorney, so I don't know, but it seems like that would be a really good use of this technology.
Excellent, good.
Are there any attorneys in the audience tonight? Anybody want to admit it? No, there's more and more. I mean, you're right. There's a lot of automation in attorneys' offices. I don't know. The last house closing I went to, I don't think a human laid eyes on the document before I had to read it. So there's a lot of programmed algorithms for a lot of our legal documentation today. One point I might want to bring up, and we mentioned privacy in your presentation. That's a good topic. You know, privacy is an obsolete term. It doesn't exist anymore. Unless you live in a cabin on top of a mountain someplace. If you're on the grid, your privacy is in the hands of somebody else. So our job is to make sure we try to manage how our important data is protected, who's using it, how do we get access to it, those kinds of things. So whenever I hear anybody say, "Oh, privacy," you know, they don't even. They're talking about the last war. That's gone. It's over. In my opinion.
There you go. Okay. Here's another one. What tools are used to measure the effectiveness of AI systems?
Well, my favorite tool is productivity improvement, doing more with less. And so one of the classical methods of productivity improvement is how much output do you get for a certain number of hours of input. And so as the number of hours decreases and we're using more and more automation, we have to really monetize the inputs. It's the depreciated cost of the asset that's being used. It's the number of hours of people time being used for the input, and then you measure the output by the sales revenue. So, that's about as far as I tend to get when I think about how effective it is.
Yeah, I agree, and I also think that you kind of need to know why you're building an AI bot or an appliance or whatever it is. You kind of need to know the purpose behind it before you can actually determine if it's successful or not. So that's something I don't think a lot of businesses are maybe doing right now. I think it's the buzzword, let's do it, let's start building this AI appliance or whatever. And then how do you measure it after that if you don't know?
So there's an interesting comparison of different strategies in that regard. Apple has traditionally been a company that spends a lot of time and effort in its product development to make sure that it's going to be successful when they bring something out. So it took them years and years to bring out the iPod, and then a few years later, iPad. Then a few years later, the phone. And so they're very careful. They don't want to make a mistake. Amazon's the other extreme. They're throwing everything against the wall. They're putting AI in everything, and hoping to find out what sticks. So their whole strategy is they've got enough money they can spend on doing real-time market research by just putting stuff out there and see what people like. Whereas Apple is trying to fine-tune their market or their product and service offerings.
And speaking of Amazon too, I'd say their Alexa and their dots and everything are getting cheaper and cheaper and cheaper, and they are listening to us. It's a fact. They're listening to us, so they're using all that data, right? Yeah. Here's an example. This was a while back. I was ordering pizza, and I was telling the girl my credit card number, and Alexa lit up. Another example, one of my 20-year-old daughter was talking to my wife, and she was going, "Oh, blah blah blah. I'm going to play a song, that annoys you." And Alexa goes, "Would you like me to play a song that annoys your parents?" They are listening. If we have time, I can show you the box that I'm building. That's through Google. That's through Google Assistant. When it does speech to text translation instantly. It goes out to the cloud, and it's all there. I can see everything. So the more I learn about that behind the scenes, I'm like, okay, yeah. Now you can turn it off. You can turn that off, but then it defeats the purpose of having Alexa, right? But they're listening.
Yeah, it's a little scary. I'm afraid my Alexa's pretty bored, though. There's not much going on.
Well, I have a neighbor whose children gave them an Alexa, and I told him I was going to sneak over every night and whisper to Alexa, order me a case of Rombauer, send it to your neighbor.
Let me add one more thing about Alexa. And you mentioned whispering. Has anybody heard Alexa whisper yet? It's the scariest thing you will ever hear in your life. Because we have a dot, right, in our bedroom, and I said something like, add something to my shopping list, and she whispered. I'm like, what? Because I wasn't talking too loud because my kids were asleep. So she thought that I was whispering. But if you whisper to her, she will whisper back.
So these digital assistants are listening, because how else will they know when to respond? So they have to be listening. Now, whether they're recording what they're hearing and sending it back to headquarters is another story. But anyway, they are listening.
Well, I'm always amazed because my niece has a 2-year-old, and I really do believe Alexa understands him much better than we do. And he's gotten very good about telling her what he wants to hear and different things. So it's amazing. Alex, you touched a little bit on some of the education aspects here, and so the question is, your suggestions for education and skill training to adults and children to prepare our country for the coming disruptions of the fourth industrial revolution. So can we just talk a little bit more? You mentioned some of the stackable certifications. There's a lot of changes going on. You know, we're in higher ed and we're seeing more and more. You know, I hear things like, you know, Apple and Amazon and Google are saying, well, you know, we don't really care if you have a 4-year degree or even a 2-year degree. We're looking for those certifications. But we're also seeing a huge influx of online universities. And there's a ton of them out there, and some of them are very good, and some of them are, you know, not as good. But we're seeing more and more online programs and just a really big variety of education. Where do you see this going? How do you guys think that this is going to affect you know, artificial intelligence? How are the two going to be tied together, and what effect is it going to have on this new fourth generation, fourth revolution?
Well, I think that there's big changes in store for the education industry as we know it because a couple of reasons. Number one, the cost of education has increased every year more than inflation for the last 40 years. That is not a sustainable number. The amount of debt, student debt, is now larger in the United States than the amount of personal credit card debt. That's not sustainable. The corporations are telling us that just because you sat in a seat for 4 years and have a diploma, a bachelor's degree, that's not necessarily the value we're looking for. We're looking for people that have demonstrable capabilities. And so that's why the concept of you know, competency-based units of education and a certificate is a good way to describe that, is a good way to know that the money that a student's spending on their education is going to create value. And too many of our academic organizations around the country are now, you know, not worth, a 4-year degree is not worth the money that's spent on to get it. So we have to find a way to do a better job to do that. So the market is attempting to do that with, and a lot of it's being stimulated in the US by corporations. Google was one of the early investors in Coursera, which is one of the new ventures I mentioned up there. edX was created by MIT and Harvard. So there's a lot of new ventures being started. The most investment money and venture money going into educational startups is in China. The Chinese government, the Chinese culture is fanatical about education, and they want to make sure that they create educational systems that are finely tuned for their population and their economy. So, you know, we're going to be learning from them how well that works, I think, to some degree. But I think there's going to be a lot of changes moving ahead, and the whole in the use of AI technology and the actual delivery of education, but also in the structure of how we demonstrate that we've accomplished or achieved some of that education. So there'll always be values. You know, I mean, we're going to end up with high value, high brand value universities, and then there's going to be everybody else. And but everybody else is going to be creating a lot of value for people who are getting education from those organizations. So it's an interesting dynamic, and that's why I mentioned the younger generation that's coming up now is not going to be afraid to try something different. And the mid-career generation is trying it right now because they need it. They need to develop new skills and add new skills. So we're seeing a lot of things happening, and that's why it's important for academic organizations such as St. Petersburg College to be innovative in those spaces to see how well, because an organization like St. Petersburg College is in a great position because you're in a position to be innovative, to deliver value, and you don't have a huge amount of inertia built into a four-year kind of environment. And so you can try different things. So I think that's where, I mean, I see that, I don't know what the final answer is or what it's going to look like, but there's a lot of things happening out there.
And I might get in trouble for saying this, but a lot of times you see like a programming student who has, or not even a programming student, that have a copy and paste mentality. I think our society kind of has that now where we're just like, oh, copy paste, okay. So then you get the diploma or your degree, right? And can you really critically think? Are you a problem solver? I've read horror stories where people go to an interview with Google or Amazon or whatever, and they're like, okay, here's a problem, and we're gonna throw a problem at you, and I want you to program your way out of it. And they're like, can I copy and paste something? Can I Google it real quick and do it? And they're like, no. There's people out there that have 0 degree. And I have a friend of mine who taught himself engineering by himself, did not go to school. Again, this is where I'm gonna get in trouble. He learned it on his own because why? Because he wanted to. He had a desire to figure things out on his own. So I think giving options for that in higher ed or wherever, let people have toys to play with and say, hey, look, you know what? Let's roll up our sleeves and figure this out. It's not going to work perfectly. You're not going to be able to copy and paste a solution. So hands-on, I think, is probably what I'm trying to say. So maybe that got me out of trouble a little bit. I don't know. But that's what I think it boils down to.
Well, I think a good point to all that is that when we have all these tools online that we can learn the theory, we can have, it's all about experiential learning as opposed to academic learning. We can do the academic learning online. Then the question is, how much of our experiential learning can we do online? So virtual reality will help a lot with that. But also people will need to learn how to work together and be problem solvers, like you mentioned. So there'll be, maybe we do that in a virtual world. Maybe we do that work. We go to a camp for a semester and have to survive in the wild or something. I mean, there's a whole broad set of opportunities to do something unique and different, where people learn how to be social, work together, problem solve together, work in teams, while at the same time their academic learning is being done as efficiently as possible at their own pace.
Great, thank you both.
And really, real quick, part of the team thing there could be an AI little helping person, a little AI thing that's there helping you become more productive and to help solve problems. It's not going to do it all for you, but it's there to help you. It's part of the team.
Good points, both of you. Thank you so much. I want to take a chance, an opportunity to open up the floor for some questions. We have a couple of folks, Jacqueline and Sharon, who are going to bring microphones around so that everyone can hear your question. And just remember that these are being recorded, so, speak loudly and clearly, please.
Your name and your social security number.
Your address.
Thank you for excellent presentations. I have a question on the productivity curve that you showed versus time. It showed that in 1980, it was tapering off, and then it picked up again, and then it was tapering off in 2010. My question is, the way you measure productivity and use that as a judgment along with ROI, today, how do you evaluate the productivity or the ROI of the benefit that I use? MapQuest, I do online banking, I do online learning, I get best prices by going online, all through the use of artificial intelligence. So my concern is the way we looked at evaluating AI, it's almost like it needs a different criteria today than it did putting a robot in a manufacturing plant?
So to use your example, the bank is monitoring how often you use the ATM or the online app, and it'll know how often you go into the office. So the fewer people they need to do the retail stuff, they'll know that. So that's how they're measuring productivity.
How does it take me into account as a consumer?
Well, so the question is it providing you with a service that you like? So if you're using the ATM more and more and not going to the teller, that means you like it. Otherwise, you'd be going into the teller. So it's the so when I say productivity, I'm talking about productivity for the companies that are putting the automation in deployment. As for us as consumers, the question is, do you get better prices from Amazon online, or do you get better prices by going to Home Depot? That's where you have to make the decision what makes more sense to you. Typically, you're going to pay more online because they've got you. They know whether you're doing competitive pricing and so forth. When you go to Home Depot, I mean, so the company that is the most concerned about AI as an existential threat is Walmart. They're spending more money on AI than anybody trying to figure out what works. Amazon has been very successful with their business model, but it took them, they were negative cash flow for 20 years, Amazon was. And remember what Amazon did start out doing? It was a bookstore, right? So they've learned over the years on how to deploy technology to satisfy their business model. Everybody else is trying to learn right now, and we're helping pick the winners. What is it that does the most for us? I mean, there are apartment buildings now where you used to go in and there was a nice little lobby, and then maybe you had a concierge, and you walked in and went to your apartment. Now you walk in, there's 400 boxes from Amazon has been delivered because everybody's ordering everything online and having it delivered to the lobby. And then, so now the whole, the concierge's job is inventory manager instead of, trying to make sure that the door gets answered. So there's a whole, different, things are changing. And when I talk about productivity, I'm talking about productivity for the companies and the people that are investing in it to put it into the marketplace. There's a question right here.
Very interesting. I'm quite confused. However, you mentioned the people getting certificates for accomplishing a certain task and area that they wanted to be have expertise in. I don't feel that that's anything new, because years ago we had vocational high schools and 3-year nursing schools. We went through different specialties. We got our information. At the end of the school years, we were tested. But in the meantime, we learned and went out and practiced what we learned that very same day. So this is, to me, very logical.
And you felt that was a good experience?
Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay, so that's that kind of experiential learning that we need, that we're expecting to see more of in all the different disciplines.
Those classes that I had when I was in school, I still use that today in when I was working.
Yeah. Yeah.
That information never went away.
Yep.
Right. And if I can chime in on that one, obviously that's music to my ears. But it really is, there is a pendulum, and so the pendulum is swinging back to that kind of learning and those smaller snippets of learning that can be applied. And so we are seeing much, much more of that, and it's very effective. It was very effective then. It kind of, went away for a little while, wasn't quite as important, and now we're seeing a resurgence of that, very much so. Okay, who else?
Yeah, just not question, maybe more comments. Education. Yes, techno skill will be the focus for many employers, but I don't think you need to lose sight of the real reason for a college education. My understanding is it's supposed to be to teach you how to think, and being a good thinker kind of relates to what you said about the fact that you need someone to make the critical decision. Next one is on the job loss. You will have job losses because mostly in the technical area where you improve reliability, because the robot will be there every day, no sick leave. Elimination of labor relations, no labor unions, I mean. And also minimization of training. I mean, if you have your robots in the program, you can overnight change their training, so to speak, to change what they're able to do. And on the bias, that was a subtle point that you passed over, but you did mention it. And from my understanding, most of the people working on AI, controlling it, are white males. So, think about how that's going to affect your 2-year-old granddaughter.
So,
Exactly.
I don't know if you've looked at the statistics or not, but there's more money being spent on AI in China than there is in the United States. They're not white males. There's a lot of the scientists in the being trained in our universities are not white males. So the bias that we're talking about is that we're creating learning algorithms that are learning the biases of the people that it operates with. Microsoft had an experiment about 6 months or about a year ago where they unleashed a Siri kind of assistant that would learn the lingo of the people dealing with it to try to be hip, and cool. And so they unleashed it. They had a big announcement. Thursday afternoon at 3 o'clock, go see Microsoft's, I don't remember the name of it, but it was the head of...
Tay.
What was it?
Tay.
T-A-Y. Okay. So anyway, they unleashed it. 36 hours later, they had to turn it off because all the hipsters out there had taught it how to say swear words, how to be rude. I mean, they just, they took it as a personal challenge to train this. It's like the kid, the baby, like you were saying, was taken to the wrong training school, and they trained it to be socially, violent. And so as a result, that was they learned something, that you've got to take more care when you train something, because you may be training it the wrong things. You may not be filtering out biases and predilections that we have as a human society. And so that's a very good point. I think that's probably even more important than privacy, is how do we make sure that when we want to unleash some technology on the world, that it not only is not biased, but also that it's objective, and also that we can believe it, being trustworthy. The deepfake, that technology, I mean, it's at the point now where you can't believe anything you see or hear. You have to find a way. In fact, the creative thinking, the analytical thinking we have to do now is, how do you figure out what to trust on what you see or hear on the internet? And that's a big challenge, is that creative thinking and constructive thinking. The other question is, what's the purpose of a 4-year degree? Does it take us 4 years to learn how to think critically? Why is it 4 years? Because that's the way it's been for 150 years. So we've got to find a better way to deploy these, to do the training we need to do, and allow people to grow and expand their horizons to a level that they can achieve.
While you're going there, I will say Microsoft made a big mistake putting Tay, that artificial bot, on Twitter. That's where it was kind of a mistake.
I think this is all great, but the trend that I'm seeing is a move away from critical thinking. That's what I see. And I think too many people believe everything that they read on the internet, et cetera, and that is a scary thing to me because I'm an educator, and there's not a push for critical thinking or creative thinking. They want STEM and STEM only. And I see that happening all over in this country.
Well, so and I agree with you that we tend, the critical thinking is a lost art, it seems like. I mean, I don't know how, we talk about critical thinking, we could spend the next 5 days talking about what that means. But you're right, I think you're right. We want critical thinking, we want creative thinking. To me, critical thinking is problem solving and thinking beyond what you're presented with. But that's a big issue. You're absolutely right. Now, there's no reason STEM couldn't be supporting critical thinking. If we're learning how to use tools to solve problems, then that's useful. Now, are we, if we're just feeding canned lectures to STEM students, then that's not good enough. You're absolutely right.
So I'm a librarian. That's my main thing, and so I'm always teaching the research side of it to make sure you confirm your sources and all that. But you're right, it's a lost art right now. It's really scary. In STEM, I teach STEM too. So STEM for me is about figuring things out on your own. The engineering, the design process, that kind of engineering kind of thinking, computational thinking kind of thing. I think it's important.
So I graduated back in 2018, and so I'm definitely on the inside of coming from like a public high school with the critical thinking piece of all this. And I want to let everyone know that as a Pinellas County School student, I have been taught to cookie cutter, copy and paste just about everything that I do. There was not really much encouragement, at least in my opinion, from my elementary to high school journey on critical thinking as much as the Pinellas County School wanted to make it seem like it was. It wasn't really encouraged. I was given the same packet as everyone else and told to figure it out the same way as everybody else. And so I definitely agree that critical thinking is a very lost cause right now. And so I love the idea that y'all were suggesting again of bringing back like situational learning and all of that. I love that idea. I think that that's a beautiful thing that we definitely need to start implementing more, especially as these generations are coming into college and growing up a little bit, because there is so much we need to learn. And it is through situations and dealing with things and critical thinking that we just don't have the skills for because we were never taught how to critical think. A lot of stuff was just handed to my generation through AI, through just making things easier on this hand and that hand. And while I can definitely say I benefit quite a bit from AI, and I'm very thankful for it, I think that there is just so many things that I wish we could learn a little bit more about on the realistic end, to not hand everything to AI quite yet.
I'm glad to hear that. Thank you very much.
No problem.
Yeah, it's great. I mean, that's a really good point. What is critical thinking? How do we achieve it? We got to do it in everyday life. I mean, it's more important now than ever before, as I said. You can't believe anything you hear or see on on first blush. You've got to go behind, you've got to peel the layers, you've got to figure out where did this information come from, double check it for 3 different sources, get together with people to try to think it through. It's more critical today just for everyday life than it's ever been.
So I think one quick statement, if we cannot critically think, how are we going to teach our machines to do it?
So AI is a lost cause.
I just want to thank you. It was just awesome to sit here, and as someone that retired as an elementary school principal, and I do have to admire you because I know where we ended up. It was just push, 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 but that's what New York State was saying, and obviously it hasn't changed down here. But I really do think we had the privilege of sitting with this young lady here that works at the St. Petersburg College and a young student. I think you have the ball right there. These 2 gentlemen have the answer. More importantly, we are parents of 4 children that we put through college. Please, we've got to do something. Not only do we help them pay for college, but they also have the loans. I think you just hit upon it. And if you could take that ball and run with it, do your certificates. You said it beautifully when you said use AI as a support system, as your little helper from kindergarten, from pre-K on. But more importantly, follow through on the critical thinking. Now, I sort of laughed when you said go to a camp because back when we were teaching, we did take kids to camp or whatever, but we can do that on a daily basis. And what I found is I was leaving my career, the kids were coming out of college 5, 6 years later, someone paying for those, which is another whole story, but if you had certificates, why could we not put them into schools or put them into different businesses and all those new jobs, put them in early on, right away. You get the help from AI, but more importantly, you get the help from the masters, and that's what we're looking at. That could be an ideal situation that we could pass through the country, where the big conversation is all about student loans. We wouldn't have that to worry about. We would have certain certificates. You'd very much, like you said before, skill-based, and then more importantly, just to get along, how to critically think, how to work it out. I love that idea. You have helper through AI, you have people creating situations where they can work together, they think, and let them make mistakes. Let them figure out that, okay, if I'm going to stand up in a classroom and it's going to bomb, that's okay, because I'm there to help you, because you already know what you have to do. We have to hone in on those skills. And as parents, we say thank you, because the tuition loans are just outrageous. And I know things will change. I know it will filter down. So take that challenge and go with it, and maybe New York State will catch on. Maybe. Well, never mind. But thanks again. It was a great presentation.
Good. There's a question back there.
Hi, I'm visually impaired, and it's kind of with the AI. I use glasses to, go to Publix to be able to read, or it reads me what the products are. And kind of based on what Chad was saying with like machine learning, I still have to go back and teach it what products are and stuff like that. So it's just kind of the benefit of AI in my aspect in this age. Not that it's good to lose your vision, but in this, with everything going on with AI and the benefits of that.
No, that's great. I mean, computer vision, that part of machine learning is a big time benefit. I mean, just think about Google Lens, for example. If I see a flower and I don't know what it is, I can take a picture of it and Google will detect what it is pretty accurately. I just got back from California and there was all these succulents. My wife and I are like, man, look at all these things, and which one's that? What's that called? Google Lens. I'm like a botanist now, right? People are like, man, how'd you know that? I'm not gonna tell you, but I just told you guys Google Lens. But that's all computer vision, and it's getting smarter.
I'd like to add a little levity to the situation. I have two friends who've sent me little videos about a robot that is a dance instructor. And I've been looking for a dance partner here in Florida for about 10 years. And I'm still looking, hoping for a robot who can do Argentine tango.
So it's those AI boyfriends we have to worry about, not the girlfriend.
So, no. Dance partner.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry.
Dance, little different than
Starts
the
out with a
boyfriend.
dance. No, I know. No.
This lady back here has been.
This has been a very interesting discussion. But one of the sides that I was in the service industry. I had an orthodontic office down half a mile away, 40 years. And you guys and where we're talking is sort of a different way. But I think the people in the service industry, AI, I'm not sure it's going to help. But what you got to teach people in the service industry is to give people a cookie every day. You know, that ATM machine never gave a cookie to my dog, but the bank teller does. And that's an important thing to learn in the service industry. Being a good teacher. Having a great education is having that professor that you looked up to. So we can talk about all these other things and learning them online, but can you get that online? I don't think so.
Well, no, that's why I'm not afraid of AI, because there's so much that we as humans, we need other people to be human. And so no amount of AI is going to replace that kind of personal touch. I mean, it may be helpful, maybe it can help us. I'd love to have an Asimo that would, take my bag of dirty clothes to the laundry, but that's not that's too expensive right now. But no, you're right. It's we're going to always need the personal touch, and we can only use AI where it's helpful and beneficial.
Well, bringing your things to the laundry, when I go to the laundry, they give my dog a cookie too.
Well, okay, there you go.
And the point is, when you get to that, I know it's a sort of a continuous task, but we look forward to those things in our day that make our day worthwhile. If AI is going to make the day more worthwhile, I want to hear that more. Not just, did it do something I didn't want to do? So that's when AI is really smart.
So let's hope Alexi's listening to you right now.
Yeah, really. There's a lady back here that's had a question. It's okay. Go ahead. We'll get her next. This one? Okay.
This one. Thank you. I understand about the educational roads, the different ways to obtain an education and knowledge. The big question I have is, can you address the expanding chasm between the haves and the have-nots? And we are going to see it. We're seeing it now. Can you address it?
Well, so if we can use technology to make all this training and education less costly, it'll be more democratic, it'll be more available. We can't afford to send everybody to Harvard. We can't even afford to send everybody to St. Petersburg College. But if we can make it more cost-effective and more available, then we have a better chance of closing that gap. And the one thing that we haven't really said in so many words here is that new jobs are being created, the existing jobs are changing, we need new skills. What that means is that what people need to learn is they need to be learning throughout their whole life. And critical thinking and not being afraid to learn new things. So that is something that we just need to make sure that we have the assets available to the people that are willing and able to learn. And not everybody is willing to learn, and not everybody is able to learn. And I think we all have seen that through time. And but the people that are willing and able to learn, they need to have access to that education capability. And a lot of it is available today. You mentioned if our public education system, which should be available to everybody, is failing us, and that's a problem. We need to fix that. And you know, going beyond that, there's more and more options. I mean, in fact, that's the observations I have is that we're seeing things change faster in terms of education at the post-academic level, people who need upskilling and mid-career. We're seeing it happen in the graduate level of higher education. We're starting to see some of it at the undergraduate level, not so much yet in K through 12. So that's, you know, we got to see more change happen there, and it's interesting to hear. I mean, to your point, I was doing this kind of course, teaching the same topic about a year ago, and I had a person in the audience who was a retired principal from Massachusetts. And you know, I did my charts, and they said, "Oh, you're exactly right. That's the right answer. It'll never happen." I mean, and that was a little depressing for me for someone that's been through that. So, oh yeah, it's too much work, too much change. But it'll change. It'll take long. I mean, some changes, some industries changes happen fast. I mean, like someone was saying. What Alexei's 5 years old and Tesla's 9 years old. It's easier to create a new industry than it is to change an old one. So.
Ted, do you have anything you wanted to add to that? Okay. Well, we have time for one more question, so I'm going to toss that one to you.
Last year I read The Industries of the Future by Alec Ross. And one thing that it touched on, that you guys touched on a little bit, but the impact that AI has on different countries. And it touched on Africa specifically, and just kind of how it's going to change its economy and its way of life and well-being. What have you seen in other countries?
So the good news is about things like AI is that's a perfect leapfrog technology that we saw it first in cell phones, where in a country like China, up until the late 1980s, they stifled their entire economy, and they never invested in the long wires, telephone poles, and wires for the installed base for a telecommunications system. As soon as cell phone technology came out, everybody in China eventually, within a span of a few years, had a cell phone. So they became totally connected almost overnight. So they leapfrogged an entire generation or two of infrastructure investment. So in places that are underdeveloped, such as many nations in Africa, they're waiting for leapfrog technology. So a lot of what we're talking about, and we saw it first in cell phones and even in Africa, microfinancing, things like that. AI is tailor-made to help countries leapfrog entire generations of infrastructure that they don't need to build because they can go right into the latest things. So there's great possibilities. I think the biggest challenge in some of the African countries is their political structures get in the way of progress. They don't really allow progress to happen, and that technology could offer. So that is one of the challenges that they have. But I think that there's a great opportunity there, and I have great expectations it's happening. And you see it happening in some of the countries.
Well, personally, I hope leapfrog technology will take care of our transportation problems here in the Tampa Bay area, but we'll see. So it's obvious that we could keep going all night. This has been so informative, and my mind is just going about 1,000,000 miles. trying to think about all of the different possibilities and the impacts that AI is going to have on each one of us. You know, I've heard several of you talk about, you know, the importance of still that human connection, and we do hear this quite a bit, that, you know, soft skills, those human skills are still very important, customer service, those kinds of things. So, you know, there's got to be that balance, but I think we're going to see some amazing new technologies that will, you know, positively affect us, and some that we're going to have to, you know, think a little bit harder about. So I would like to thank also, in addition to our two amazing panelists, both Chad and Dr. Beavers, thank you so very much. I would also like to thank tonight's volunteers and the Bay Area Catering for a wonderful meal. That's the best meal I've had all week, you guys. And before we close out the evening, I'd like to take a moment to tell you about the Policy Institute's next events. For our SPC students that are in the audience, please note that on November the 14th, the final competition for the 2019 Great Debate is here at the Seminole Campus Digitorium. The topic is whether social media has a negative effect on our social and political life. That too should be an interesting conversation. And on December 12th and 13th, the Institute is hosting the Florida Civic Advance Summit right here again in the Conference Center. You can learn more about these events on the Policy Institute website, which is solutions.spcollege.edu. And I want to say thank you again for attending. And gentlemen, thank you so much.